The frozen earth had cracked beneath her shovel like brittle bone, and Dara Brightwater had wept until there were no tears left, only the raw ache in her chest that matched the burning in her frost-bitten fingers. She stood now in the doorway of what had been her family's cabin, staring at the 5 mounds arranged in a neat row behind the woodshed, each marked with a simple wooden cross she had carved herself. Her father, her mother, her 2 brothers, and finally her grandmother, all taken by the fever that had swept through their isolated homestead like a curse. The last one, her grandmother Morta, had died 3 days ago, and Dara had dug that final grave alone in the bitter cold, her massive shoulders shaking with sobs that echoed across the empty white expanse of their land. She was 19 years old, an orc woman living on the borderlands where human territories bled into the wild frontier, and now she was utterly alone. The cabin felt too large and too empty. Every corner held memories that cut like knives: her mother's weaving loom in the corner, her father's pipe still resting on the mantel, her brother's hunting gear hanging by the door. They had been outcasts here, a family of orcs who had chosen to live peacefully among humans rather than join the warring clans in the mountains. Some humans had tolerated them, most had not, and now they were gone, and Dara stood in the ruins of everything she had ever known. She did not hear the horse approach until it was nearly at her door. Dara's hand went instinctively to the axe propped against the doorframe, her green fingers wrapping around the worn handle as she stepped outside. The winter sun was already setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, and silhouetted against that light was a man on horseback. He sat tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered and wrapped in a heavy wool cloak, his breath and his horse's breath making twin clouds in the frigid air. "I am not looking for trouble," he called out, raising both hands to show they were empty. His voice was deep and steady, the kind of voice that suggested he was used to being heard. "I saw smoke from your chimney and thought I would check if you needed help. The nearest village is 2 days' ride from here, and not many people live this far out." Dara did not lower the axe. Her tusks, small and curved, pressed against her lower lip as she studied him. He was human, that much was obvious from his smooth skin and rounded ears. His hair was dark, almost black, and his face was weathered in a way that spoke of hard years and harder winters. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30. "I do not need help," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse and crying. "You should go." The man's eyes, she could see now, they were a warm brown, like polished wood, swept over her face, then moved past her to the cabin behind. She knew what he was seeing: the neglected state of the place, the empty animal pen, the fresh graves behind the woodshed. "My name is Emmett Branford," he said quietly. "I have a homestead about 15 miles west of here, near Copper Creek. I came out this way tracking a wolf that has been killing livestock." He paused, then added carefully, "Those graves look recent." Something in Dara's chest cracked open, and she felt the tears coming again despite herself. "I buried the last of my kin this winter," she said, and the words came out as half a sob. She hated the weakness in her voice, hated that this stranger was seeing her like this, but she could not stop herself. The fever took them all, every single one. Emmett Branford dismounted in one smooth motion and took a step toward her, then stopped when she raised the axe higher. He held up his hands again, but his expression had softened into something that looked genuinely pained. "I am sorry," he said, and it sounded like he meant it. "That is a heavy burden to carry alone." "I can carry it," Dara said fiercely, even as her vision blurred with tears. "I do not need pity from a human." "Then let me be your family," Emmett said, and the words hung in the cold air between them like something solid and real. Dara stared at him, shocked into silence. "What?" Emmett took another careful step forward, his boots crunching in the snow. I know what it is like to be alone. I lost my wife and daughter to fever 3 years ago. I know that emptiness. And I know that sometimes what you need is not pity, but someone who will stand beside you and help you keep living. He gestured toward the cabin. You have land here and a home. But winter is cruel and you cannot survive it alone. Let me help you. No strings, no expectations. Just one person trying to help another make it through. Why would you help an orc? Dara demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. Your kind hates mine. They call us monsters and savages. Some do, Emmett admitted. I have met orcs who were monsters, and I have met humans who were worse. I judge people by their actions, not their blood. He nodded toward the graves again. Your family chose to live peacefully here. That tells me something about who they were, and who you are. Dara wanted to tell him to leave, wanted to send him riding back to wherever he came from and close the door on the world. But the cabin behind her was so empty, and the silence was so loud, and she was so terribly tired of being alone. 1 week, she heard herself say. You can stay 1 week. Help me fix what needs fixing before the worst of winter comes. Then you leave. Emmett nodded slowly. 1 week. That is fair. That first evening was awkward and tense. Dara made venison stew in her mother's old iron pot while Emmett tended to his horse, a sturdy roan gelding he called Copper. They ate in near silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional scrape of spoons against bowls. Emmett slept on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in his own bedroll, while Dara retreated to the small room she had shared with her grandmother. She lay awake most of the night, listening to the sound of another person breathing in her home. It felt strange and intrusive, but also somehow comforting in a way she did not want to examine too closely. The next morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Emmett proved true to his word, rising before the sun to help her with the endless list of tasks that came with keeping a frontier homestead running. He repaired the damaged section of the animal pen where a tree branch had fallen during the last storm. He chopped wood until there was enough stacked against the cabin wall to last through several weeks. He checked the roof for weak spots and reinforced the ones he found. Dara worked alongside him, her orcish strength making easy work of tasks that would have exhausted a smaller person. They spoke little, but there was a rhythm to their labor that felt natural. When she held a board steady, he knew exactly where to drive the nail. When he needed a tool, she handed it to him before he asked. By the 3rd day, something had shifted between them. They began to talk as they worked small things at first. Emmett told her about his homestead near Copper Creek, about the handful of cattle he kept, and the garden he tended each summer. Dara told him about her family, about how her father had been a skilled carpenter, and her mother had made the most beautiful woven blankets anyone had ever seen. Why did they settle here? Emmett asked as they sat together during a brief rest, sharing bread and dried meat. So far from other orcs. Dara pulled her heavy cloak tighter around her shoulders. My father did not want to fight anymore. He had been a warrior in the mountain clans, but he grew tired of the raiding and the killing. When he met my mother, she felt the same way. They wanted peace, so they came here to make a life away from all of it. She looked toward the graves. The humans in the nearest village tolerated us, but they never accepted us. We were always outsiders, always suspect. That must have been hard, Emmett said quietly. It was the life we had, Dara replied with a shrug, but her voice was tight. And now it is over. Emmett was quiet for a long moment, then said, It does not have to be over. You are still here. You can keep their memory alive by continuing what they built. Alone. The word came out bitter. You do not have to be alone, Emmett said, and when Dara turned to look at him, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart do something strange in her chest. He looked away quickly, clearing his throat. I mean, you could come to Copper Creek. Start over. There are good people there who would not turn away someone willing to work hard. And how many of those good people would welcome an orc into their midst? Dara asked sharply. Emmett had the grace to look uncomfortable. Some would object, but some would not care. And the ones who matter would judge you fairly. Dara wanted to believe him, but years of suspicious looks and whispered insults had taught her to be cautious. I will think about it, she said finally, which was more than she had expected to offer. The fourth night brought a storm that howled around the cabin like a living thing, piling snow against the walls and making the shutters rattle. Dara woke to find Emmett stoking the fire, his face illuminated by the dancing flames. She rose and joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Could not sleep, she asked. The wind reminds me of winters on the campaign trail, Emmett said, not looking at her. I was a soldier once before I came to Copper Creek, spent 3 years fighting in the Northern Territories. Against orcs, Dara asked, her voice carefully neutral. Among others. Emmett finally turned to face her, and his expression was haunted. I did things I am not proud of, followed orders that seemed right at the time but feel like sins now. When my wife Sarah died, I left the army and tried to build something good, something that mattered. A life of growing things instead of destroying them. Dara studied his face, seeing the weight of old regrets written there. Is that why you stopped to help me? Penance for past wrongs, maybe partly, Emmett admitted. But also because, when I saw you standing there with that axe, looking so fierce and so broken at the same time, I recognized something. The same look I saw in the mirror for months after Sarah died. The look of someone who has lost everything but is still standing, still fighting, even though they do not know why anymore. And what did you do? Dara asked softly. When you felt like that, I kept waking up every morning. I kept tending my land. I kept going to the village and talking to people even when I wanted to hide away. And slowly, bit by bit, life started to feel possible again. He met her eyes. You will get there too, I promise. Dara felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something that had been frozen since her grandmother had taken her last rattling breath. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for not treating me like a monster. You are not a monster, Emmett said firmly. You are a woman who has suffered loss and is still finding her way through it. That takes more courage than any battle I ever fought. They sat together by the fire as the storm raged outside, and for the first time since her family had died, Dara did not feel completely alone. The 5th day dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. They spent the morning digging out the cabin from the drifts that had piled against the door, and by afternoon they were able to venture to the nearby stream to check the ice. Emmett wanted to make sure the water source would remain accessible through the worst of the winter. As they walked through the snow-covered forest, Dara found herself watching him more than she should. The way he moved with easy confidence through the wilderness. The way his breath made clouds in the cold air. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at something she said. She had never looked at a human this way before, had never let herself even consider it. The gulf between their peoples was too wide, the hatred too deep. But Emmett made her feel safe, made her feel seen, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, there was still a future worth living for. They were on their way back to the cabin when they heard it, the deep, rumbling growl that spoke of a predator far too close. Emmett's hand went to the knife at his belt as he scanned the trees, and Dara raised the hatchet she had been using to mark their trail. The wolf stepped out from behind a massive pine, and Dara's breath caught. It was enormous, far larger than any wolf had a right to be, with matted gray fur and eyes that gleamed with hunger and intelligence. This was the beast Emmett had been tracking, she realized. The one that had been killing livestock. "Get behind me," Emmett said quietly, but Dara ignored him, stepping forward to stand at his side. "I am not helpless," she said through gritted teeth. The wolf snarled, its lips pulling back to reveal yellowed fangs, and then it lunged. What happened next was a blur of motion and adrenaline. Emmett dove to the side, his knife flashing as he tried to get beneath the wolf's guard. Dara swung her hatchet in a wide arc, catching the beast's shoulder and drawing a spray of blood across the white snow. The wolf yelped and spun toward her, and she barely got her arm up in time to protect her throat as its jaws snapped shut. Pain exploded through her forearm as teeth punctured flesh, and she screamed. But her other hand still held the hatchet, and she brought it down hard on the wolf's skull. Once. Twice. On the third blow, the creature finally went limp and fell heavily into the snow. Dara stumbled backward, her injured arm clutched to her chest, blood seeping between her fingers. Emmett was at her side in an instant, his face pale with fear. "Let me see," he demanded, and when she hesitantly extended her arm, he sucked in a sharp breath. The bite was deep, the puncture wounds ragged and bleeding freely. "We need to get you back to the cabin. Now." The walk back was agonizing. Dara's arm throbbed with every heartbeat, and she could feel the warmth of her own blood soaking through her sleeve. Emmett kept one arm around her waist, supporting her weight when she stumbled, his jaw set in grim determination. Back at the cabin, he worked with swift efficiency that spoke of battlefield experience. He cleaned the wound with boiled water and whiskey that made Dara bite back screams, then wrapped it tightly in clean cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. Through it all, he kept up a steady stream of reassuring words, telling her she was doing well, telling her she was brave, telling her she would be fine. When it was finally done, Dara lay on her bed shaking from shock and pain, and Emmett sat beside her, his hand clasped tightly around her uninjured one. "That was foolish," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You should have let me handle it." "We handled it together," Dara corrected weakly. "And if I had not hit it when I did, it would have torn your throat out." Emmett made a choked sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You saved my life." "You have been saving mine all week," Dara said, meeting his eyes. It seemed only fair to return the favor. Something passed between them in that moment, something electric and undeniable. Emmett leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips gently to her forehead. "Rest," he whispered against her skin. "I will be right here." Dara slept fitfully, her dreams full of wolves and graves and Emmett's steady presence. When she woke, it was dark outside, and her arm was a dull ache rather than a sharp agony. Emmett had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, one hand still loosely holding hers. She studied his face in the dim firelight that filtered through the doorway. The strong jaw, the small scar above his left eyebrow. The way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, but more than that, he was kind. He had seen her at her lowest and had not turned away, had offered not pity but partnership, had looked at her green skin and tusks and pointed ears and seen not a monster, but a person worth knowing. Dara realized with a jolt that left her breathless that she was falling in love with him. The thought should have terrified her, should have sent her scrambling for all the reasons this was impossible, all the ways it could go wrong. But instead, it felt like coming home, like finding something she had not known she was searching for. She squeezed his hand gently, and Emmett's eyes fluttered open. For a moment he looked disoriented, then his gaze focused on her face and he sat up straighter. "How are you feeling?" he asked immediately. "Better," Dara said, and it was true. not just her arm, but all of her. "Thank you for taking care of me." "Always," Emmett said, and the word held a weight of promise that made Dara's heart race. The 6th day was spent quietly, with Dara resting and Emmett handling the chores. He brought her meals and changed her bandages with gentle hands, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood on a farm in the Southern Territories, about the sister he had not seen in 5 years because of the war, about his dreams of one day having a larger homestead with proper fields and maybe a few pigs. Dara told him about learning to hunt with her brothers, about the songs her grandmother used to sing in the old Orcish tongue, about the strange isolation of being caught between two worlds not human enough for the humans, not Orcish enough for the clans. "You are enough exactly as you are," Emmett said fiercely when she mentioned this. "Anyone who cannot see that is a fool. You are the first person outside my family who has ever said that to me," Dara admitted, her voice thick with emotion. Emmett reached out and tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her pointed ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Then everyone else has been blind." On the 7th day, Dara woke to find Emmett already up and moving around the cabin. She could hear him in the main room, packing his saddlebags. The week was over. He would be leaving. The realization hit her like a physical blow, and she found herself struggling to breathe. She could not let him go, could not return to the terrible silence and emptiness of being alone. But what could she offer him? What reason did he have to stay? She rose and dressed carefully, her injured arm still stiff but healing cleanly, and walked out into the main room. Emmett looked up when he heard her, and something complicated passed across his face. "Your arm looks better," he said. Not "good morning," not "how are you feeling," just a neutral observation that felt like a wall going up between them. "It is healing well," Dara said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Thanks to your care." Emmett nodded and went back to packing. Dara watched him for a long moment, her heart hammering in her chest, and then she could not hold back the words any longer. "You have to leave." His hand stilled on the leather strap he had been buckling, but he did not look at her. "That was our agreement. 1 week." "I know what we agreed," Dara said, taking a step closer, "but I do not want you to go." Now Emmett did turn to face her, and his expression was anguished. "Dara, I cannot stay. Do you not see that?" "I have been here a week and I am already," he broke off, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I am already too invested, already care too much. If I stay any longer, I am going to do something foolish." "Like what?" Dara demanded, moving closer still. "Like tell you that I think about you every moment. Like confess that I lie awake at night listening to you breathe and feeling grateful that I get to exist in the same space as you. Like admitting that when that wolf had you, the terror I felt was worse than anything I ever experienced in combat, because the thought of you being hurt, of you dying, was unbearable." His voice had risen with each word, and now he was nearly shouting. "Like saying that I am falling in love with you, and I have no right to feel that way because I am human and you are an orc and the world will never accept us." The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and terrifying. Dara felt tears pricking at her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "Then be foolish with me," she said softly. "Because I am falling in love with you too. I know it is impossible. I know it is wrong by every rule our peoples live by, but I do not care. You make me feel alive again. You make me believe there is still beauty in the world. You make me want to keep going, keep living, keep trying." She closed the distance between them and placed her uninjured hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "You said let you be my family, so be my family. Stay with me. Build a life with me, not out of pity or obligation, but because you want to, because you choose to." Emmett's hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled over onto her cheeks. "I do choose you," he said hoarsely. "God help me, I choose you over everything. Over reputation and safety and the approval of people who do not matter. I choose you." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the gentle press of lips to her forehead. This was desperate and passionate, a claiming and a promise all at once. Dara kissed him back with equal fervor, her tusks making the angle awkward but neither of them caring. Her good arm wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer, and his arms went around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Emmett rested his forehead against hers. "What do we do now?" he asked. "How do we make this work?" "We figure it out together," Dara said firmly. "We stay here or we go to Copper Creek or we find somewhere entirely new. It does not matter where we are as long as we are together." "Together," Emmett repeated, and it sounded like a vow. They decided to stay at the homestead, at least through the rest of winter. Emmett sent word to his neighbor in Copper Creek to look after his cattle, saying he had been delayed by the weather and would return in spring. The man who carried the message back looked at Dara with undisguised suspicion, but Emmett stared him down until the man left without comment. "That will be the first of many such looks," Emmett said after the man had ridden away. "I know," Dara replied, "but I have weathered worse. We both have." The weeks that followed were the happiest of Dara's life. They fell into an easy routine, working together during the days and spending the evenings by the fire, talking and laughing and stealing kisses like teenagers. Emmett taught her the human card game his father had shown him as a boy. Dara taught him a few words of the Orcish language her grandmother had passed down. They made plans for spring, what crops to plant, whether to try raising chickens, how to best repair the old barn. One night, as they lay together in the bed that had once been her parents', Emmett traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder and said, "Marry me." Dara went very still. "What? Marry me?" Emmett repeated, propping himself up on one elbow to look down at her. "I know it might not be legal in most places. I know most priests would refuse to perform the ceremony. But we can do it ourselves, make our own vows, bind ourselves to each other in the way that matters most by choice and commitment and love." Dara felt tears sliding down her temples into her hair. "You would want that, truly, more than anything," Emmett said fiercely. "I want to call you my wife. I want to build a life with you that is permanent and real. I want the whole world to know that I chose you and you chose me and that nothing will ever change that." "Yes," Dara breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." They held their wedding on the first day of spring, when the snow had finally melted and the first green shoots were pushing up through the earth. Dara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric her mother had woven years ago, the pattern a beautiful weave of blue and green. Emmett wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, his face shining with joy. There was no priest and no witnesses, just the two of them standing before the 5 graves behind the cabin. Dara spoke first, her voice clear and strong. "I, Dara Brightwater, take you, Emmett Branford, to be my husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things. To weather storms and celebrate sunshine. To be your partner and your family. To love you with all that I am for all the days I am given." Emmett's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "I, Emmett Branford, take you, Dara Brightwater, to be my wife. I promise to honor you and protect you. To see you as you truly are and never ask you to be anything less. To build a home with you full of laughter and hope. To love you fiercely and without reservation for as long as I draw breath." They had no rings, so instead they clasped hands and cut their palms just shallow enough to draw blood, pressing the cuts together in the ancient tradition of blood oaths. It was fitting, Dara thought, that they should begin their marriage with this gesture that transcended the boundaries of culture and species. Blood to blood, life to life. "We are married," Emmett said wonderingly, and then he was kissing her, and Dara was laughing against his mouth, and it felt like the beginning of everything. The years that followed were not easy. Some of the humans from the nearby village refused to deal with them once word spread of their union. A few times, young men emboldened by drink rode out to the homestead with violence in mind, only to be turned away by Emmett's reputation as a former soldier and Dara's imposing presence. There were lonely periods when the isolation of their choice weighed heavily on both of them. But there were also years of quiet joy, of planting crops together in the spring and harvesting them in the fall, of fixing up the old barn and filling it with chickens and goats and eventually a milk cow, of sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, Emmett's hand warm in hers, of learning each other's bodies and hearts with increasing intimacy and trust. 2 years after their wedding, Dara gave birth to a daughter. She had green-tinted skin lighter than Dara's, tiny tusks that barely showed when she smiled, and her father's warm brown eyes. They named her Sarah Branford after both of their mothers, and Emmett wept when he first held her. "She is perfect," he whispered, cradling the infant against his chest. "She is ours," Dara replied, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. 3 more children followed over the next years, 2 sons and another daughter, each one a unique blend of their parents' heritages. The cabin that had once been far too empty became gloriously, chaotically full of life and noise and love. Some human travelers who stopped at their homestead looked at their mixed family with disgust or fear. But others looked with cautious curiosity, and a few with something like hope. Change came slowly to the frontier, but it did come, one open mind at a time. On the 10th anniversary of the day Emmett had first ridden up to her cabin, Dara and her husband stood together at the graves behind their home. The children were inside, the older ones watching the younger, giving their parents a rare moment of peace. They had planted wildflowers around the graves years ago, and now they bloomed in riotous profusion, making the place look less like a cemetery and more like a garden of remembrance. "Do you think they would approve?" Dara asked quietly, nodding toward the graves. "My family. Do you think they would be happy with the choice I made?" Emmett wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close against his side. "I think they would be proud of you. You survived when survival seemed impossible. You chose love when hate would have been easier. You built something beautiful from grief and loss." He kissed her temple. "And I think they would be grateful that you are not alone." Dara leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and leather and home. "I buried the last of my kin this winter," she said, echoing the words she had spoken to him so long ago. "And you said, 'Then let me be your family.' And I meant it," Emmett replied. "Every word. Every day. You gave me back my life," Dara whispered. "You gave me hope and purpose and a future I never imagined I could have." "You did the same for me," Emmett said. "I was existing, but I was not really living. You changed that. You changed everything." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future. 2 people from different worlds who had chosen to build a bridge between them, made of love and commitment and sheer stubborn determination. It had not been easy, and Dara suspected it never would be. But as laughter drifted out from the cabin, her children's voices raised in some game or argument, she knew with absolute certainty that every struggle had been worth it. She had buried her family in the frozen earth of that terrible winter. But from that grief had grown something new and precious, a family of her own choosing, bound not by blood alone, but by the deliberate, daily choice to love across every boundary society tried to erect. Behind them, the wildflowers swayed in the evening breeze, their sweet scent carrying on the air like a blessing. And ahead of them, the cabin glowed with warmth and light, full to bursting with the life they had made together. Dara took Emmett's hand and led him back toward that light, back toward their children and their home and the beautiful, impossible future they were creating one day at a time. Inside, chaos reigned as usual. Little Sarah, now 8 years old, was trying to braid her younger sister Maya's hair while the two boys, Thomas and David, wrestled on the floor like bear cubs. The scene was so perfectly, wonderfully normal that Dara felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Mama, Papa," Sarah called when she spotted them. "Tell Thomas and David to stop fighting. They are going to break something." "We are not fighting, we are training," Thomas protested, though he reluctantly released his brother from a headlock. Emmett laughed and moved to separate the boys, ruffling their hair affectionately. Dara went to help Sarah with Maya's braid, her practiced fingers making quick work of the tangles. This was her life now. Not the one she had imagined as a girl, but one that was infinitely more precious for having been fought for. That night, after the children were all asleep, Dara and Emmett sat together by the fire as they had done countless times before. He was mending a harness, his needle moving with the easy competence of long practice, and she was working on a new blanket, trying to recreate the patterns her mother had once taught her. "You ever regret it?" Dara asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could think better of it. "Choosing this life, choosing me." Emmett set down his work and looked at her with such love and certainty that it stole her breath. "Not for a single moment, not even when it is hard, not even when people judge us or shun us. Every day I wake up beside you is a gift I do not deserve but am grateful for anyway." "You deserve every happiness," Dara said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." "And you are the strongest woman I have ever met," Emmett replied. "In body, yes, but more importantly in spirit. You faced loss that would have destroyed most people, and you kept going. You opened your heart to love again even when it was terrifying. You are raising our children to be brave and kind and true to themselves, regardless of what the world tells them they should be." Dara felt tears prickling at her eyes. Even after all these years, his words could still undo her completely. "We are raising them together," she corrected. "I could not do any of this without you." "Then it is fortunate we never have to find out," Emmett said with a smile. He set aside his mending and moved to sit beside her on the bench, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "We are in this together, remember, for all the days we are given." "All the days we are given," Dara repeated, letting herself sink into his warmth and strength. Outside, the spring wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the promise of new growth and new beginnings. The graves behind the cabin stood silent and peaceful, no longer symbols of ending but reminders of continuity, the thread that connected past to present to future. Dara thought of her father's hands teaching her to carve wood, of her mother's voice singing lullabies, of her brother's laughter echoing through the forest, of her grandmother's stories told by firelight. They were gone, but they lived on in her memories and in the traditions she was passing to her own children. The isolation and prejudice her family had endured had not been in vain if it meant their descendants would live in a world slowly learning to accept love in all its forms. "What are you thinking about?" Emmett asked, noticing her faraway expression. "Legacy," Dara said after a moment. "I was thinking about how the choices we make ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. My parents chose peace over war, and that choice brought them here. Here is where I met you. And now we have 4 children who are proof that the boundaries between our peoples are not as fixed as everyone believes." They will face challenges we cannot protect them from, Emmett said quietly, and Dara heard the worry in his voice. The world is not kind to those who are different. No, Dara agreed, but we are teaching them to be strong, to be proud of who they are, to fight for what matters and to love fiercely despite the cost. She turned to look at him directly. That is all any parent can do, give their children the tools to survive and the courage to thrive. Emmett nodded slowly, then leaned in to kiss her forehead. You are right, as usual. Remember that the next time we argue about the best way to fix the roof, Dara teased and Emmett laughed. The fire burned low and eventually they banked it and made their way to bed. In the darkness, Dara listened to her husband's breathing slow into the rhythm of sleep, and she thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago standing alone in the snow, broken by grief, certain that her life was over. That girl could never have imagined this. Could never have dreamed that from the ashes of her loss would rise something so beautiful and true. Could never have guessed that a chance encounter with a kind-hearted human would transform her entire world. But here she was, a wife, a mother, a survivor, a fighter. Still an orc woman with green skin and tusks and pointed ears, still subject to the prejudices and fears of those around her, but no longer alone. Never alone again. Thank you, she whispered into the darkness, not sure if she was speaking to Emmett or her lost family or the universe itself. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me that endings can also be beginnings. Beside her, Emmett stirred and pulled her closer in his sleep, and Dara smiled. Whatever challenges tomorrow brought, they would face them together. Just as they had faced every storm and every sunrise for the past 10 years. Just as they would continue to do for all the days they were given. The cabin settled around them, full of sleeping children and well-worn memories, and the quiet contentment of a life built on love and choice and unwavering commitment. Outside, spring continued its slow transformation of the world from frozen death to vibrant life, and in that transformation was a promise. That even the harshest winters eventually end, that grief can coexist with joy, and that family is not just what you are born into, but what you choose to create. Dara closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that she was home not just in the physical cabin, but in the arms of the man who had seen her at her worst and chosen to stay, who had offered not pity but partnership, who had looked at the space left by her lost family and said with perfect sincerity, "Then let me be your family," and he had been. He was. He would be for all the days they were given and beyond. That was enough. More than enough. It was everything.